They're here to help us. That's what many of the so-called experts in the field keep saying, that we're in the age of disclosure, and that the truth about extraterrestrial life is finally surfacing. That whatever is watching us from the skies are benevolent, that they're here to guide us, protect us, maybe even save us from ourselves. But what if that's not the full story? What if they're not guardians, but cruel, cold, and unfeeling scientists, poking and prodding at their experimental livestock, humanity? In this video, we're going to look at the darker side of alien encounter cases, where contact didn't bring enlightenment, but fear, trauma, and injury. On the morning of May 19, 1967, a Polish immigrant named Stephen Michalak said goodbye to his wife and 2 children, and headed out the door for a weekend trip. Stephen was a talented amateur prospector who had heard there was silver in the hills surrounding Falcon Lake, so that weekend, he caught a Greyhound bus from his home in Winnipeg, Canada, to the stop nearest Falcon Lake. He got off the bus and got a hotel room for the night. The next morning, he stepped out of his room, crossed the highway on foot, and set off into the woods in search of silver. Stephen hiked off trail for hours through the Canadian wilderness, until finding a vast clearing with a beautiful view of Falcon Lake. The clearing was there because in that area, almost the entirety of the forest floor had been displaced by a massive flat rock face. So Stephen donned his gear, including welding gloves to protect his hands, and a welding mask to protect his eyes from any rocks, and he began hammering away with his pickaxe. What seemed like hours later, he was still slamming his pickaxe into the ground over and over again, but a commotion loud enough to be heard over his pickaxe strikes startled him. He dropped the pickaxe and turned around to see a huge flock of geese coming up off the lake and flying away. Then he saw what had startled the geese.
2 cigarette-like shape things with the hump in the middle. I said, what the hell is that?
2 large, bright, glowing orange cigar-shaped objects coming right across the lake towards him. The objects passed right over him and stopped midair about 200 yards away. One hovered in the air for a moment, then shot away at incredible speed. The other dropped lower and landed nearby on a rocky outcropping. Stephen could hardly believe what he was seeing. The craft was shaped like a huge disc, 45 feet wide, completely overtaken with fascination, not fear. Stephen retrieved a sketch pad and pencil and actually sketched what he was seeing. As he finished his sketch, moments had passed, and the pilots of the craft had still not stepped out. See, Stephen wasn't thinking this was aliens, he thought it was some kind of advanced secret military craft, and he was starting to worry that the pilots may need his help, so he started to make his way closer. As he approached, a hatch slid open, and an extremely bright violet light poured out of the opening. A strange, high-pitched whirring sound filled the air, and the smell of sulfur stung Stephen's nose. He called out, starting in English, then switching to Polish, then Russian, then German, and he got no reply. The violet light was so bright, he couldn't quite see into the craft, so he pulled his goggles back down. Then suddenly, the hatch slammed shut. Instinctively, he reached his gloved hand out and pressed it up against the hatch that had just closed. The heavy welding glove instantly started to melt off of his hand. The entire craft began to rotate counterclockwise. As it did, a grid pattern vent came around and stopped as it passed Stephen. And that's when Stephen's life changed forever. A blast of searing hot gas shot out of the vent, hitting Stephen square in the chest, causing his shirt to instantly burst into flames. He tore it off, clawing at his burning skin. The pain was excruciating. He staggered away, half blind and choking from the fumes, and as he looked back to the craft, it had shot hundreds of feet up into the air, disappearing into the clouds. Disoriented, dizzy, and vomiting, Stephen tried to make his way back towards the highway through the woods. It took him hours, but he did eventually make it back to his motel, and he just collapsed on the bed. At this point, he was violently ill. That's when he looked down at his chest and saw the horrifying marks that had been left. A series of raised burns forming a perfect grid pattern, matching exactly the exhaust vent he'd seen on the craft. The hotel staff thought he was drunk at first, but then realized he didn't smell like alcohol at all. He smelled like burning sulfur. They informed Stephen that the nearest hospital was 45 miles away, so he packed up his things and staggered over to the Greyhound and went back to Winnipeg. When his family saw him, they were mortified. His skin was gray and he looked completely gaunt. His eyes were totally bloodshot and he was shaking uncontrollably. His burns had blistered into weeping sores, and he smelled so strongly of sulfur and motor oil that even the hospital staff remarked on it. Doctors began treating him for burns, obviously, and dehydration, and they immediately diagnosed diagnosed the burns on the top of his chest as thermal burns, but the grid-like pattern of red sores that matched the vent on the side of the craft weren't heat burns, but some kind of chemical burns. Doctors could never determine what chemical had caused these burns, and they tested for everything, including radiation. But his symptoms would grow even stranger. Do you ever feel like you're being watched, even when you're all alone? Maybe it's the existential dread of living in a world with an increasingly predatory internet. If you're watching this video, then there's likely a lot more information about you on the internet than you'd like. There was about me as well. But thanks to this video's sponsor, Aura, that's no longer an issue. If you've ever wondered how scammers get your phone number, or why your inbox is constantly flooded with spam, it's because data brokers make billions of dollars selling your data without your consent. And they'll sell it to anyone: scammers, marketers, and even stalkers. I don't have to worry about that because I use Aura. Aura monitors your personal data, including your social security number, across billions of data points like the dark web and public court records, to detect and alert you to potential identity theft. They take care of the hard part, automatically removing your information from these sites and keeping it off. And they'll even provide you with up to $5 million in identity theft insurance should the worst case scenario happen. They also provide a bunch of other features to keep you safe online, all inside one app. You can use my link, aura.com/Parasyke, to get 14 days for free. That'll be enough time for Aura to find out if any of your personal data has been exposed. I highly recommend doing this right now, because when would be a better time to start protecting you, your assets, and your identity online? You can use my link, aura.com/Parasyke, to try 14 days for free now. And a massive thanks to Aura for sponsoring this video. For weeks, Steven suffered from intense headaches, blackouts, weight loss, and sudden fainting spells. His skin developed strange purple rashes that would come and go with no explanation. Investigators would visit the site and find a large, circular burn patch, roughly 15 feet in diameter. The site was found to be radioactive, although it would later be determined to be radioactive due to a vein of radium running through the entirety of the area. However, at the center of the burned out circle, there was a spike in radioactivity. They dug a hole, and there were multiple scraps of highly pure silver pieces, almost melted into the rock. These silver pieces were coated in a pitch-blende ore, which contains both uranium and radium. Both the Canadian and United States governments investigated this incident, and there was enough strange evidence that they basically came out and said they couldn't debunk Steven's claims, but that there was no satisfactory explanation, so they couldn't draw a conclusion. Not only did Steven Michalak receive life-altering wounds and a mysterious health condition that would follow him for decades, after going public, they were humiliated in the press, called liars, and their kids were even bullied in school. He never made a penny from telling his story, and even invested his own money into printing 40-page pamphlets to leave on his porch telling the whole story along with photographs, so that all the people showing up to his house looking for him could just take one and go away. Steven lived until he was 83 years old and passed away in 1999. Our next case takes us to the humid jungles and fishing villages of northern Brazil. In 1977, on the remote island of Colares, at the mouth of the Amazon River, a place where life was simple until the sky turned hostile. For months, villagers reported something terrifying. Strange lights were appearing in the sky, hovering low and darting back and forth, sometimes even following people as they walked around at night. Locals referred to this phenomenon as "Chupa Chupa," meaning the sucker in Portuguese. At first, people thought they were seeing some kind of natural phenomenon or some kind of military crafts, but then the lights started attacking. Witnesses described thin beams of light like laser pointers, but with a power that felt alive. These beams struck people unexpectedly, sometimes even when they were inside their homes. Victims said it felt like a sudden electric shock, a wave of heat, a force that seemed to drain the life out of them. Many fell instantly to the ground, unable to move or speak, and they were left with bizarre injuries. Dr. Carvalho, a young physician working at the Colares Health Clinic in 1977, treated over 40 patients who suffered from these attacks. In interviews decades later, she described their symptoms. They arrived terrified, weak, pale. They presented small punctures in the skin and significant loss of blood, as if the lights were extracting something. The wounds were typically small, like needle punctures surrounded by burns that sometimes glowed faintly under ultraviolet light. Blood tests showed victims suffered severe anemia, sometimes requiring hospitalization. People complained of headaches, fatigue, numbness in limbs, and constant fear. In one case, a woman named Aurora Fernandez was standing outside her home when a red beam came and hit her directly in the chest. She fell to the ground, completely paralyzed. For weeks, Aurora couldn't speak or walk. Her family began to fear that she would never recover. Another man, Manuel Santos, claimed a blue beam struck him directly in the shoulder, leaving a small burn hole. In the following weeks, the hair at the wound site began to turn white, a detail echoed by other victims. The fear in Colares grew so intense that entire communities began to change their way of life. People stopped fishing at night, and they avoided going out after sunset. Villagers built huge bonfires, believing the flames would keep the lights away. Some even fired guns and fireworks into the air in desperation, and yet the lights kept coming. Finally, the local authorities began to ask the government for help. Eventually, the Brazilian Air Force launched Operation Prado, or Operation Saucer, a secret military mission led by Captain Holanda. Holanda and his team spent weeks in the jungle, documenting the phenomenon. They conducted interviews, took photographs, and even filmed the mysterious lights. In a 1997 interview, Captain Holanda said, "These objects were controlled by intelligence. They moved precisely, sometimes following people, and the beams they projected could paralyze or cause burns." Holanda even claimed to have seen the lights strike an old fisherman who fell unconscious, his chest marked with a strange burn. In his reports he wrote, "They seemed to suck blood or energy from their victims. We found physical evidence, burn marks on rooftops, vegetation scorched in perfect circles, elevated radiation levels at alleged landing sites." As Holanda's team would be observing the lights' patterns and movements, there seemed to be other sets of lights monitoring his team's patterns and movements, almost like they were ready to respond to any kind of military intervention. Holanda eventually moved his team's camp, and the lights followed. Despite this, no official explanation was ever given. The Brazilian government classified the reports as unknown. In 1997, 20 years after Operation Prado, Captain Holanda came forward publicly. He spoke about how his team was ordered to keep silent and how the true nature of the lights was never revealed to the public. Just a few months after that interview, Captain Holanda was found dead in his home, hanging from a rope. His death was ruled but many suspect a cover-up. Today, the Chupa Chupa incident remains one of the most well-documented UFO encounters in history. Skeptics call it mass hysteria, fueled by fear and rumor, but Dr. Carvalho insists the injuries were real and medically inexplicable. And as Holanda's own words suggest, the victims of Colares may have been caught in something far more sinister. On the evening of December 29th, 1980, in the pine forests of East Texas, Betty Cash, Vicky Landrum, and Vicky's 7-year-old grandson Colby are driving home to Dayton, Texas, after a night out. It's around 9 p.m., and the road is empty, a narrow stretch of FM 1485 cutting through dense trees. Suddenly, a strange light appears in the sky. At first they think it's an airplane on fire, plunging towards the trees. But as they drive closer, they realize it's not crashing, it's hovering. Suspended above the road is a massive object, shaped like a diamond, glowing with an intense, fiery light. Flames shoot from the bottom like a blast furnace, and the entire craft emits a roaring, rhythmic noise. The heat pouring off of it is so intense it makes the car's metal dashboard too hot to touch. Betty pulls the car over and steps out, hypnotized by what she's seeing. As Betty stares up at the craft, she feels a wave of searing heat. Sweat pours down from her face, and her skin starts to sting. And then the craft slowly rises and drifts off into the trees. But it's not alone. 23 helicopters, some witnesses say more, appear out of nowhere, swarming the object. Vicky and Betty both describe them as large, tandem-rotor military helicopters, probably CH-47 Chinooks. For a few seconds, the road becomes an inferno of whipping helicopter blades and blinding lights. And then it's gone. At first, they're just shaken, but by the time Betty drops Vicky and Colby off at their house, all three of them were feeling extremely ill. Within hours, Betty Cash is violently sick. Her face and scalp blistered, her eyes swelled shut, and she was tormented by burning skin and intense nausea. A few days later, her hair begins to fall out in clumps. Vicky Landrum suffers equally horrifying symptoms: sunburn-like rashes, hair loss, and cataracts in both eyes. Unsurprisingly, all three were diagnosed with symptoms consistent with radiation exposure. Betty Cash's condition becomes so severe, She's hospitalized for over 2 weeks. Her weight drops rapidly, and doctors note cell damage in her tissues, but no clear cause. The incident changed their lives forever. Betty suffered from cancer, recurring skin lesions, chronic fatigue, and hair loss for the rest of her life. Vicky developed permanent eye damage and a compromised immune system. Colby is left with trauma and memory gaps. They all file a lawsuit against the US government, claiming they'd been injured by a craft under military control, but their case collapses. The government denies any involvement. The craft itself remains a mystery. Some researchers speculate it was a malfunctioning experimental vehicle, a nuclear-powered aircraft, a prototype that was leaking radiation. Others believe it was something not of this Earth. John Schuessler, an aerospace engineer and one of the principal investigators of the case, wrote, "The injuries sustained by Betty, Vicky, and Colby are medically real. Whether human or extraterrestrial, someone is responsible." The Cash Landrum Incident is one of the most well-documented UFO encounters that ends with severe bodily harm. It left scars not just on their bodies, but on their lives. And it raises a disturbing question. Whether it's alien or man-made, this secret technology is out there, and what happens when we get in the way? Well, Betty and Vicky would tell you, nothing good. I came across these stories during research for a much longer and more disturbing project, covering the history of negative close encounters, including the long and dark history of animal mutilations, and a deeper dive into the abduction phenomenon. That video will be a Patreon exclusive and will be up soon, so if you'd like to see that or any of these other exclusive uncensored videos, hop on over to my Patreon and become a member today. The link is in the description. If you enjoy this, please leave a video, and be subscribed, you're sure. Also, comments help a lot.